Night City loves, even worships legends, afterlife cocktails, street cred, and the chance to die in a blaze of glory. All ideals that mercenaries spend their entire careers chasing, hoping for their names to be remembered. Becoming a Night City legend is treated as the highest achievement in the dark future, the ultimate form of freedom, of rebellion, and immortality through reputation. But the more I dug into the lore, the more I realized something. We completely misunderstood what Night City legends were supposed to be. Night City has created a culture where characters inside the setting and fans outside of it become obsessed with status, spectacle, and reputation. Everybody wants to become the next legend. But when you actually look at who gets idolized, a surprising amount of legends fail to stand for anything meaningful. And more importantly, many of them don't represent what Cyberpunk is even about. And when you begin to realize that, the entire idea of becoming a legend starts to look a lot less inspirational. Night City legends were meant to be warnings to viewers, not something to strive for. The entire system is built on myths, survivorship bias, corporate propaganda, and decades of exaggerated stories spreading through a corrupted net. Morgan Fraudhand, the legendary hide-and-seek champion of Night City, strategically checking under his bed every night for Smasher. Adam Smasher himself, whose kill count is almost entirely civilians. And Johnny Silverhand, the anti-corpo revolutionary who somehow managed to get split in half during his first serious encounter in 2023, yet still walked away as one of the biggest legends in Night City history. Alright, obviously Agenda Punk is leaking into this video a little bit, but underneath those jokes are a truth. Night City benefits from these inflated myths. The city needs mercenaries chasing impossible dreams, whether it be the fixers who hire them or the corporations shelling out the eddies. So today, I'll be going through the canon tabletop RPGs written by Mike Pondsmith, dating all the way back to the late 80s, and asking two questions. What are we meant to take away from the Night City legend mythos? And are there any Night City legends worth idolizing as a cyberpunk? Let's begin.
It's dying's a small price to pay for going down in history.
No more running for me, dog. Reaper's finally calling my name.
You got my word. Arasaka all the way to the top.
Death. It's nothing but the final flash.
Legends are born here.
It'll be all right, V. You'll see.
Don't make a name for yourself as a cyberpunk by how you live. Make a name by how you die.
So what actually is a Night City legend? Dominance, fame, charisma, a stylish death? All different answers you can get depending on who you ask. But despite how often the term gets thrown around, there is actually some official Night City legend certification office handing out licenses and ranking mercenaries, corpos, fixers, and the rest. The fact is that the title is entirely based on reputation and influence. They aren't defined by ideology or morality, but by visibility. How many people care they exist? Have they been involved in major crises? Do they hold influence, or are they capable of seizing it through strength? And how have they shaped the world around them, for better or for worse? And they shouldn't be confused with being cyberpunks, someone who lives on the edge and refuses to adhere to a system that seeks to control their humanity, identity, or freedom. A Night City legend is remembered by the city. A cyberpunk refuses to belong to it. Take Morgan Blackhand, for example. The average Night City merc couldn't tell you how many jobs he completed, recite his cyberware, or even accurately describe what he looks like, but they know his name, not his ideologies or principles. It's the fact his name has seemingly outlived him. A form of immortality for those who can't afford to secure your soul. An appealing dream for people who come from nothing. And that dream is exactly what Night City sells better than anything else. Which brings us to the afterlife. Contrary to what many people think, getting a drink named after you doesn't automatically make you a legend. Nor is it a prerequisite or defining factor to being one. It means you died in a way that the afterlife community deemed memorable. That's it. It's a cultural honor, not a ranking. And I think that changes the meaning of one of the most famous lines in Cyberpunk.
Don't make a name for yourself as a cyberpunk by how you live. Make a name by how you die.
A line that appears contradictory for legends like V, Blackhand, Rogue, Carrie, and countless others. Rather, it's an example of successful cultural conditioning. This is deliberate storytelling and manipulation by corpse. Because if you can convince people immortality comes through reputation, they stop asking harder questions. Questions like, who actually benefits from me risking my life? Who profits when I become a legend? And why does every path to becoming unforgettable somehow end with me becoming disposable? Because the afterlife doesn't preserve the people who changed the system, it preserves the people who became stories. Stories that inspire more mercenaries, those who chase impossible dreams, and the cycle continues. That makes the afterlife a part of Night City's corporate crafted mythology, though perhaps more of us should have realized Arasaka's meddling with Rogue much sooner. And what really made this all stand out to me was comparing Night City to other cyberpunk IPs, because this obsession with becoming a legend isn't actually a norm for the genre. In most cyberpunk stories, people aren't trying to become celebrities, they're trying to survive and usually fight corporations because they want freedom, not for a drink to be named after them. Look at a lot of classic cyberpunk media. People disappear into the crowd, reject systems, expose corruption, then they leave. Success isn't measured in fame. Night City uniquely turned rebellion into celebrity culture, and perhaps the biggest piece of evidence against this obsession with legends comes from Cyberpunk's own creator. Mike Pondsmith has famously described Cyberpunk as a genre that isn't about saving the world, it's about saving yourself. And that's important because Night City teaches the exact opposite lesson. The city tells people that the highest form of success is becoming unforgettable, becoming a legend, dying in a blaze of glory so spectacular that people are still talking about you decades later. But Cyberpunk has never really been about this. It's been about holding on to your humanity in a world designed to strip it away. It's about protecting the people you care about. It's about refusing to let corporations, governments, gangs, and technology decide who you are. The irony is that so many of Night City's famous legends fail precisely because they stopped trying to save themselves. I want to preface the upcoming arguments with something important. I realize that participating in a system isn't the same as actively supporting it. Many people in Night City do what they need in order to survive. Oftentimes this means taking part in a flawed system, such as many mercenaries working directly with corporations despite being Edgerunners that want to tear them down and live outside their control. There's layers to this, and I hope that this video can communicate that effectively.
Want the afterlife to make a drink in your name, you gotta die first. You know the rules.
I live like a legend first, though, huh? You imagine. Susan Forrest, Boa Boa, maybe even Morgan Blackhand.
I hate to break it to you, but you're no Morgan Blackhand.
There's a saddening irony to Jackie Wells' dream, a mercenary who wanted to hit the big leagues, pull off the impossible heist, give Arasaka the middle finger, and become one of Night City's greatest punks. Yet the man he spoke highest of was Morgan Blackhand, a professional solo, a Night City legend, who isn't a cyberpunk, who spent the majority of his legendary career employed by Militech. Sure, most people work for corporations in some capacity, but Blackhand obviously wasn't starved for contracts and certainly didn't have to be loyal to Militech, but he was. And it raises an interesting question. Why is one of the most celebrated figures in a genre centered around resisting corporate power a man whose greatest successes were achieved while working for one of the largest corporations on Earth? Well, I think that comes down to what people actually admire about Blackhand: his discipline, competence, and professionalism. Despite having access to virtually unlimited resources, he only installs what he needs. His cyberware isn't excessive, it's deliberate. Every implant serves a purpose, and every piece of equipment fills a role. But what becomes frustrating about Blackhand being such a revered character isn't because he's a corporate lapdog, but because there's another version of him that feels far more aligned with what Cyberpunk is trying to say, one that is more deserving of admiration. So what could this look like? Well, it actually comes straight from source material that has been retconned: Cyber Generation. In this timeline, a nanotech plague known as the Carbon Plague spreads across the world. Unlike most diseases, it primarily affects the younger generation, granting them strange new abilities while making them targets of governments and corporations alike. The setting is radically different from mainline Cyberpunk, but what interests me is what happens to Blackhand. By this point, he had left Militech completely behind. When the Incorporated States of America attempts to recruit him into an organization tasked with hunting down infected children, Blackhand refuses. He adheres to a very strong moral code. Not only does he refuse, he kills their second in command and leaves a trail of bodies behind him on the way out. From there, he joins Al Cunningham, Johnny Silverhand, and Rache Bartmoss in a guerrilla campaign against the ISA, fighting to protect those being exploited by the system. And for the first time, Morgan Blackhand starts to feel like more than just a legend. He feels like a cyberpunk, someone willing to risk his own safety not for a paycheck, not for reputation, but because there are people who need protecting. Now, obviously, cyber generation isn't the main continuity, but I think it highlights something important. The reason people love Blackhand isn't because he worked for Militech, it's because they want to believe there's something more to him. They want to believe that underneath the contracts, the corporate wars, and the legendary reputation, there's still a man with principles. And maybe Pondsmith's comments about Blackhand still being out there means we haven't seen the end of that story just yet. There's still time for him to take on this role.
You're a manipulator, an egotist, and a cynic. Every time you open your mouth, you gotta bury someone.
I saw a corpse strip farmers of water, and eventually of land.
They can change who you are, turn you into someone else without you even knowing it. Know what? Glad we talked, Johnny. You've changed.
For better or worse.
The guy who saved my life.
Good night, Valerie. Today was a good day.
Unlike Blackhand, we don't need to guess what Johnny Silverhand stood for. He hated corporations, he hates authority, he hates the way Arasaka and Megacorps treated human beings like disposable resources. The man spent years publicly attacking corporations through music, activism, and eventually outright terrorism. If anyone should represent the cyberpunk spirit with the Night City legend mythos, it's Johnny Silverhand. And yet, much of what makes Silverhand famous is built on myth. When people talk about Silverhand in 2077, they picture the man who stormed Arasaka Tower, planted a tactical nuke, fought Smasher, and brought the largest corporation in the world to its knees. But this version of events isn't entirely true. Not only are Johnny's memories distorted by time, ego, and the relic, but the story itself has been distorted by decades of retellings and corporate manipulation. When we look at the actual events of the Fourth Corporate War, Johnny wasn't even the second most important person involved. The assault on Arasaka Tower was part of a much larger Militech operation. Morgan Blackhand was there, Militech was there, entire militaries and Edgerunner crews were involved. Johnny was one piece of a much larger conflict, yet somehow he became the face of it. Someone wanted his story changed, and he ended up being a scapegoat for one of the most deadly incidents in Night City history. The man who spent his life fighting corporations and corrupt governments ultimately became a corporate product himself. His memories became data, his personality, intellectual property. But Johnny refused to remain a product. The version of Silverhand we meet in 2077 isn't perfect. He's arrogant, self-centered, bitter. He still carries many of the same flaws that defined him in life. But for the first time, he's forced to confront what his obsession cost him, the people he hurt, the mistakes he made, the reality that he wasn't the center of every story. And through V, Johnny is given something almost nobody in Night City ever receives: a second chance. Not a second chance at fame, not a second chance at becoming a legend, a second chance at becoming a better person. Which is why I think Johnny occupies a strange place in this discussion, because unlike many Night City legends, the thing that makes Johnny interesting isn't his reputation, it's his growth, his willingness to stand for something, his willingness to sacrifice, and eventually his willingness to admit when he was wrong. His legend is largely built on distortions and decades of exaggeration. But the man underneath that legend, the man trying to become something better than he was, that's the part of Johnny Silverhand that actually feels cyberpunk. Because cyberpunk was never about becoming famous, it was never about having your name remembered forever. It was about holding on to your humanity in a world determined to take it from you. And for all of Johnny's flaws, he never stopped fighting for something bigger than himself. Ironically, that's what makes him more worthy of admiration than the legend ever was.
A rudimentary implant. None leave the slaughterhouse. Not alive. You could say I'm special. And now, I as the corporation will crush you. It will be my pleasure! Silverhand. How is this even possible?
Now, before people start typing angry comments, I need to clarify something. When I call someone a fraud in this video, I don't necessarily mean they're weak. Atom Smasher isn't weak, Blackhand isn't weak, Johnny Silverhand is weaker than most mercs, but makes up for it with charisma that makes a crowd rush Arasaka Tower. A fraud is someone whose reputation represents something completely different from the reality under it. And if that's our definition, then Atom Smasher might be one of the biggest frauds in Night City history. Behind the Arasaka branding, combat cyberware, and blind violence is the 4% of meat left of a nobody from the Brooklyn streets. Without Arasaka, Atom Smasher would have died decades ago after a failed job left him reduced to little more than a handful of surviving organs. Everything that turned him into the NC boogeyman came from a contract. The most feared mercenary in cyberpunk history doesn't even have autonomy. He belongs entirely to Arasaka. That's what makes his reputation so ironic. People view Smasher as the embodiment of power and freedom, a man who does whatever he wants without answering to anyone. But the reality is almost the opposite. Even his legendary kill count is less than impressive upon review. His countless victims and unmatched brutality. But how many of those kills were opponents of any substance? How many were solos on Blackhand's level? On V's or Shaitan's? Not many. Most of Smasher's career consists of overwhelming people who never had a chance to begin with. Civilians, street gangs, low-level mercs, and nomads. It's terrifying, but not impressive. He's a legend with no substance beyond violence.
Would you rather live in pieces, Mr. Nobody, die ripe, old, and smelling slightly of urine, or go down for all times in a blaze of glory, smelling near like posies, without seeing your 30th? Remember our first convo? Seems I've chosen the quiet life after all.
I'll fucking kill you!
Me.
My man, Dexter DeShawn. How's that quiet life working out for you now, Chew?
But while Atom Smasher represents a legend built on corporate ownership, someone like Dexter DeShawn represents something even more common in Night City, the fake legend. People who understand that reputation is often more valuable than reality. Because despite all the talk about legends, most people chasing that status aren't becoming the next Blackhand. They're becoming the next Dexter DeShawn. When we meet Dex, he's presented as a major player, a legendary fixer returning to Night City after years away. Someone with connections, influence, respect. A man capable of organizing the biggest heist of a decade. And then the moment things go wrong, that entire image collapses. The plan falls apart. His intelligence was wrong, his risk assessment was wrong, his contingency plans were non-existent, and his first instinct isn't to save the crew, it's to shoot V in the head and run. For all of his talk, all of his confidence, all of his carefully crafted image, Dexter DeShawn folds the second he's faced with real pressure, because that's the secret in Night City. Most reputations are exaggerated, but reality always shows up eventually, and when it does, a lot of legends suddenly look a lot smaller. That's why I think Dexter is one of the most important characters in 2077, not because he's powerful, but because he represents a reality check of a player. Just another person desperately trying to convince everyone they're more important than they really are. And Dex isn't alone. Night City is filled with people just like him. Fixers inflating their influence, and mercs exaggerating their body counts.
Mikoshi's deep underground like Hanako claims it is. You'll just have to find the elevator.
If I gotta die, rather fall into my grave gun in hand and on fire, and not drag anyone down with me.
Huh. You just discovered what it takes to become a legend.
So after all of this, who are the real Night City legends? Honestly, I think that's a wrong question, because that's the trap Night City wants you to fall into. The city wants you obsessed with legends and wants you comparing kill counts, debating who would win in a fight, arguing over whose drink belongs on the Afterlife menu. It wants you focused on a reputation, because as long as you're chasing that dream of becoming a legend, you're not asking who benefits from that dream in the first place. And that's the irony. Night City legends were never meant to be role models. They were warnings. Warnings about ambition, ego, and selling pieces of yourself in pursuit of power, status, and recognition. Yet somewhere along the way, both Night City's inhabitants and parts of the fandom started treating these people like saints, people to idolize, people to emulate, people whose footsteps should be followed. But when we actually examine them, this idea was far more complicated. Blackhand is a legend, but spent most of his life serving a corporation. Silverhand is one of the most genuine cyberpunks in the setting, yet his legend is built upon distorted memories and rewritten history. David Martinez may be one of the closest things to a true legend, but his story is ultimately a tragedy about chasing someone else's dream until it killed him. And Dexter DeShawn spent his life chasing status without the substance to back it up. None of them were perfect, and most of them aren't even close to people I would encourage others to become, even in this setting. And that's exactly the point. Cyberpunk was never about becoming famous. It was never about having a drink named after you, and it certainly wasn't about being remembered forever. As I said before, Mike Pondsmith famously said,
"Cyberpunk isn't about saving humanity, it's about saving yourself."
Holding on to your humanity, to your beliefs, refusing to become another product, another statistic, another cog in a machine designed to consume you. Some characters succeed at that, some fail, and some leave their marks on history. But the ones that remain true to themselves are often far more cyberpunk than the legends everyone worships. So maybe the real lesson isn't to become the next Night City legend, maybe it's to avoid becoming the next one at all. And that is everything I have to say about Night City Legends. Maybe being remembered and being worth remembering aren't always the same thing. Let me know all your thoughts down below. Did this video change your perspective on the idea of Night City Legends, or was it just a bunch of words? Are there any characters you think deserve more recognition than they get? This video was initially just a Morgan Blackhand as a fraud script. Would have been much shorter, easier, much less serious, and mostly just an excuse to spread the agenda punk propaganda. But that script sat for a long time. And when I came back to YouTube, I reread it and realized there was a much more interesting conversation to be had. Something of substance that maybe could get you guys thinking. So I basically scrapped the original script and started over. In a weird way, this video ended up being a remaster of one of my oldest videos on the channel, What Makes a Night City Legend. You're officially an OG if you remember that one, and I wouldn't recommend going and watching it because it's probably pretty outdated and of poor quality. But I have more on the way. Lore, theories, collaborations, episodes to my in-universe podcast, live streams, etc. I also completely nuked my old Discord and rebuilt it from the ground up, so if you haven't joined already, I'd appreciate you checking it out. Everything important will be linked down below as always. I've also restructured YouTube memberships. Unfortunately, YouTube forces creators to have multiple tiers, but I really only want people joining the $1 membership, so that's where all the perks are. If I could make it free, I would. But YouTube isn't exactly known for making things simple. Speaking of memberships, thank you to all the Night City legends up on screen. Is it weird to hear yourselves called that after watching this video? Probably. But unlike most Night City legends, you actually stuck around. Whether you genuinely wanted to support the channel or simply forgot the memberships existed during my 7-month disappearance, I appreciate every single one of you. And of course, thank you to everyone who watched this video to the end. The community has allowed me to come back and keep creating videos that I genuinely care about, and for that, I will always be grateful. So, as always, have a great week, and I'll see you later, chooms.